Hello, thank you for joining us today. Sorry for the little bit of a late start. We were encountering some technical difficulties. While we wait a few minutes for everyone to join from the waiting room, can you please put your name, your affiliation or organization, where you're joining from in the chat, and we will start to get to know who's in the room today. I'm going to pause for a moment, because it does take a little while for the waiting room to catch up to the meeting. I just also wanted to start by saying that I know that many of our colleagues in Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, many parts of the Southeast United States are unable to join us while they're recovering from Hurricane Helene and dealing with Hurricane Milton. So just recognize, acknowledge that, and our hearts and thoughts are with them during this time. We are recording the webinar, as well as we'll share the slides with everyone who registers. My name is Sherry Steinig. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Communications for Generations United. Welcome to our webinar, Creating Inclusive Intergenerational Spaces in the LGBTQIA+ community. We're using Zoom meeting instead of Zoom webinar for this session, so just please be sure to keep yourself muted. As a reminder, your mute button is at the bottom left of the Zoom screen. Everyone should have been muted when you joined the meeting, but just in case, be mindful of that. We will primarily be using chat to communicate, so the chat button is also down at the bottom of your screen. And then if you haven't done so already, you can see the chats going by. Please be sure to introduce yourself with your name, your affiliation, and your location. We have a full agenda today, and this session is scheduled for 1 hour. We'll keep the meeting open for an additional 30 minutes for Q&A and discussion with the panelists. So if questions come up during this webinar, you can save them till that time or put them in chat. If you have suggestions or responses to the questions or anything that's said during this webinar, please also feel free to respond in chat. We know there is a lot of expertise in this Zoom today, so we hope you will share yours. Again, as I mentioned, we're recording the webinar. We'll share the recording and the slides with everyone who registered. And we will be, over the next sort of couple of slides that I go through, we'll also be putting links in chat. So when you see things in the presentation, we'll also be getting links in chat. Most of you probably know Generations United, but for those of you who don't, Generations United is a national nonprofit that strengthens practices and policies to benefit all generations. Our website, gu.org, hosts a database of over 700 intergenerational programs and in-depth information on how to develop and cultivate intergenerational relationships. We recognize excellence in intergenerational programming through our certification process. Applications for our programs of distinction and merit designations just open and are due on November 7th. To learn more, you can check out the link in chat, and we'll hope you consider applying. We also work to build connections among people who are interested and committed to bringing younger and older people together. One of these opportunities is our global conference, which is held every other year. Our next conference is June 25th to 27th, 2025 in Louisville, Kentucky. We've just opened registration and the call for sessions. So proposals for conference sessions are due December 2nd. So we hope you'll visit the conference website, guconf.org, for all the details and considering applying for a session. We also are hosting another webinar in 2 weeks on October 24th for the release of our new Intergenerational Living Blueprint. We'll unveil innovative strategies for cultivating intergenerational living, hear from thought leaders and fellow advocates dedicated to creating safe and sustainable housing, and that improves the health and well-being for all generations. So we hope you can join us for that. Today's session is presented as part of our Shared Site Learning Network, which is made possible with support from the Eisner Foundation. Recordings and materials, I meant to look to see, I think this might be our 9th or 10th meeting of this group. Recordings and materials from all of our previous meetings are available on our website. We've covered topics like intergenerational play, the arts, staff training, program evaluation, funding, sustainability, just to name a few. In addition to these meetings, we do have an online toolkit that we encourage you to check out if you haven't already, called Sharing Our Space at sharingourspace.org, and we produce a quarterly newsletter. So the next newsletter will be released and days. And everyone who attends, it'll focus on more information on the LGBTQIA plus inclusive spaces, and everyone who registered for this event will get a copy. And then lastly, we are also hosting this webinar on Ageism Awareness Day. So today is Ageism Awareness Day, and we know that research shows that intergenerational practice can help reduce ageism and is one of the key ways to do that. So to learn more, we hosted a webinar earlier this year during Global Intergenerational Week on combating ageism. And then the World Health Organization has a campaign to combat ageism. And the American Society on Aging has a lot of resources, excellent resources about this campaign. So with that, we are very excited for today's session. We have amazing presenters that have just a rich wealth of information to share with you today. And we look forward to learning more about their work, as well as how you're creating safe and supportive spaces and intergenerational work there. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nancy Henkin, and our presenters.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everybody. I too am really excited about our panel and about this topic. When we decided to focus on intergenerational relationships and exchange in the LGBTQ community, I started interviewing and reading a lot and talked to a lot of people about this issue. And I think that it just hasn't received a lot of attention. But there were some takeaways, although I didn't do a comprehensive survey of everyone. Some of the things that I heard from people was that there really aren't a lot of intentional, inclusive intergenerational spaces in the LGBTQIA plus community. That there's a lot of siloed programming. So although there are centers, they are mostly multi-generational, not intergenerational, in that there are things going on for youth and older adults in different ages. But in many places, there isn't that intentionality about promoting interaction and exchange. I also heard a number of programs, and you'll read about them in the newsletter that's coming up, but more of them are one-time or short-term programs. Now, luckily, you'll hear about the Intergenerational Dialogue Program, which is ongoing, but I think there are lots of opportunities to move from kind of these one-time things to more ongoing programs. But the thing that I really found interesting was that there's great interest in doing this work. And a lot of people said, this makes so much sense. We need to do more to kind of foster this kind of exchange. And I was talking to a researcher in California, and she said she had done 20 focus groups with older adults in the community and found that a major issue was their desire to connect with other generations. So today we're going to talk about how to create both spaces that foster a sense of belonging and respect and cross-generational understanding, and to address, this is so important in addressing the loneliness and social isolation issue that is affecting all of us around the world. We have a great panel. I'm just going to name their names right now first, and then we're going to get started. But they're from different parts of the world, and therefore there are different cultural contexts when we talk about this issue. We have Adam Greteman, Associate Professor of Art Education at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. He was a co-founder of the Intergenerational Dialogue Project. And with him are Phyllis Johnson, the Elder Liaison of the project, and Katia Klemm, who is an undergraduate research assistant in the program. Then we have Andrew King, who is professor of sociology at the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom. And finally, Wilfred Labiosa, who is founder and CEO of Ways Ahead in Puerto Rico. So very, very interesting group. I think we will start, I guess we can start with Wilfred to tell us a little bit about his program and his centers in Puerto Rico. What we're going to do is we're going to have each presenter talk about 4 or 5 minutes about their program or their materials or their research. And then we're going to go into a series of questions that go a little deeper about the nature of intergenerational relationships. So Wilfred, do you want to start and tell us a little bit about Waves Ahead?
Well, first of all, Nancy, thank you for the invitation and for the dialogues that we have had before reaching today's educational session. And thank you for Generations United for the invitation. So as Nancy stated, my name is Wilfred Labiosa and I represent Ways Ahead. It is the organization here in Puerto Rico that provides direct services and focuses on the older adult LGBT from our 5 community centers. That was our beginning. And now, since last year, we have included in our community that we have provided services, the younger adults, starting on age 16 all the way to elders. So our oldest participant right now is 89 years of age. Bless him. He is in our west side of the island and he is our elder at the moment. Our services, we focus on providing services that on the prevention and the care of the mental health of our community. Although we began as an organization providing only mental health and yoga and meditation, we have added more services, including yoga therapy, dance therapy, music therapy. We also do food sustainability programming by assisting the individual providing their own little garden or their little harvest in their spaces. And we provide all what they need in order to grow that space. Even if it's a room, we can provide them little boxes so they can grow tomatoes or lettuce, whatever it might be that it is in their space, because that provides them also something to look up and to do every day. Most of our elders in Puerto Rico, and we are a small island in the Caribbean, for those of you that may not know where Puerto Rico is located, we're in the Caribbean. We're the 3rd largest island in the Caribbean, closest to Dominican Republic. And to our right, it is the U.S. Virgin Islands of St. Thomas and St. Croix, which are the closest to Puerto Rico. We are mainly, our services of Ways Ahead began in San Juan, but because we understand that it is so hard to reach the capital, San Juan, we have developed in the 4 cardinal points, community centers, to be able to provide these services to the community at large from those. Recent year, we have developed housing programming that includes rapid rehousing, a shelter, and permanent housing units focused on the elder community. The shelter, it is for anyone in the community that is LGBT and or escaping a violent situation. In regards of our programming, we intentionally has developed support groups that include all ages in our programming. And that is, we have 3 support groups, one for gay men and bisexual men. We have another one for transgender and non-binary individuals. And we have the 3rd one that is for lesbians and bisexual women. Those support groups are intergenerational. And that has been an interesting thing that later on we can talk about when we reach the questions. Lastly, what I want to say is that we have developed a program that really focuses on the empowerment of these individuals as community leaders, no matter their age. And we developed the Academia Empodérate, the Empowerment Academy, which is twice a year. And as a matter of fact, the 7th annual one is tomorrow and Friday, so Thursday and Friday. And we are going to have a group of sessions that we bring all around the island. So the 7th one is here in San Juan, but the last one was in Isabela, which is in the northwest part of the island. And then the other ones we have done in the different parts of the island. So we can bring these learning experiences to the generations all across the island. Although our island is small, it is very hard to transport. And that's one of the issues that later on we can, I can expand on because of the lack of transportation. Our elders have suffered a lot of anxiety, a lot of isolation, reaching specialists in the medical field, as well as food is very hard for them. So we have added transportation vans that bring all of our clients to in the Southwest, in Cabo Rojo, and in San Juan and Maunabo, which are in the other parts of the island, which the capacity that they can reach out to Ways Ahead, and we can provide them transportation so that we can minimize a little bit that social isolation.
Great. Thank you so much, Wilfred. I've enjoyed our conversations too, and I'm really impressed with the way you have moved forward, and you are so intentional about bringing generations together in all of your activities, whether they're empowerment activities or services. So thank you, and we'll get into more of the other details later. Okay, how about Andrew? Let's go from Puerto Rico to Surrey, England.
Nice.
Thanks very much, Nancy. It's really great to join everybody today. Yes, I'm based at the University of Surrey, which is in a place called Guildford, which is about 25 miles southwest of London. I've been researching LGBTQI plus aging for about 17 years. I've got a sort of interest in housing, especially. But it was really in one particular study that I conducted between 2018 and 2021 that I really began to focus on generations and intergenerational exchanges. I won't talk too much about this now because it will come up in the responses to questions, but the project was called Comparing Intersectional Life Course Inequalities amongst LGBTQI citizens in 4 European countries, England, Scotland, Portugal, and Germany, which will be pleased to know that we shortened to the acronym CELIA LGBTQI. And I led the England, well, I led the overall project and the England part of the project. And with my project researcher, we interviewed a large sample of LGBTQI plus people who were aged over 18. And what we began to notice was how there were sort of interesting generational elements in their interview responses. And through that, this led us to write a chapter in this book called Studying Generations Multidisciplinary Perspectives. And it's an open access book. So if you scan that QR code, you can get access to our chapter. It's an academic book, so it's written in a kind of academic language, and we drew on a queer theoretical perspective in the process of writing that, and really rethinking this idea about generations in LGBTQI plus communities. And as I say, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the questions. So if we could have the next slide, please, Sherry. I'd just like to talk about 2 projects that I've been involved with more recently, both of which have intergenerational elements, either implicitly, as in the case of the Lifehouse project, or explicitly, as in the case of that intergenerational project. So the Lifehouse project uses theatre to empower older LGBTQ plus people to voice and act their concerns, experiences, and preferences around housing and care. And it therefore enables them to exchange and express their stories with younger generations of LGBTQ plus people, as well as allies and service providers. So the project itself wasn't set up as an intergenerational project, but inevitably it's become an intergenerational project, and not least because different generations are represented amongst the project team. And we worked with Tonic Housing in London, which is the UK's first older LGBTQ plus affirmative retirement community. The intergenerational project came out of the CELIA project that I mentioned a moment ago, and this was specifically working with LGBTQ plus charities in London to develop a toolkit to facilitate intergenerational exchanges. And that was again sort of we did that because of that project, and also because increasingly in talking to people in community organisations, they were looking at ways to bring different generations together to exchange ideas and views and stories of their lives. So if I could have the last slide, please, Sherry. And on that intergenerational exchange project, we worked with both monogenerational and intergenerational groups in workshops. There were a series of activities, including participants drawing their rivers of life and sharing them in safe spaces where they could talk about their lives and the experiences that they'd had and where they thought their lives were going as well. And it really enabled older LGBTQ plus people to hear the concerns of younger people and vice versa, and to share stories with each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And you'll be able to connect to the link to the toolkit. I don't know if we'll do this today, Sherry, if you can put that in, or you will get a newsletter that has the link there. And I think you're doing some really, really interesting work. So thank you for sharing with us what's going on in England. So our last group is a team. We have Adam and Phyllis and Katia. So I don't know how you guys want to do this, but why don't one of you start out and you can tell us about the Intergenerational Dialogue Project in Chicago.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Sherry and Generations United. I'm Adam Greteman, as Nancy noted. I'm going to give a little bit of historical context and description of the project, and then Katia and Phyllis will provide some of their insights in the question. So we don't want to take up too much of the intro time. But the Intergenerational LGBTQ plus dialogue project is situated in Chicago, Illinois. Those of you who are international attendees, that's kind of right in the middle of the United States. And we began in 2019, the fall of 2019, as an experiment to think about what would it mean to bring together different members of LGBTQ plus generations, in part because two of us are college professors. We work with young people, and they would talk about not knowing that old gay people existed in a very kind of simple way. And I've also volunteered and worked with LGBTQ plus elders for 14 years, and I heard them time and again talk about wanting to interface and learn from young people and what's going on in the lives of young LGBTQ plus people. So it seemed like there was a need and an interest, and so Karen Morris and I partnered with the Center on Halsted, which is Chicago's LGBTQ plus community center. And they have a component of that which is devoted to senior services. So we partnered with the senior services to create a kind of year-long experience where elders and youngers get to have intergenerational dialogue. And that includes starting the experience with a shared meal, recognizing that some of our participants may be food insecure, and so we wanted to make sure everybody had a full belly starting the dialoguing, but also because of the importance of sharing a meal as a form of community building. Alongside the meal sharing, we then engage in a range of dialoguing in large groups, medium-sized groups, small groups, really focusing on the role of storytelling and what stories allow folks to learn about one another, but also the broader LGBTQ plus histories that are still not part of many people's curriculum. So whether younger or older, a common statement is, I don't know anything about LGBTQ plus history. And so the Dialogue Project is really a way for folks to learn that history by people who've lived that history, whether they experienced the Stonewall riots in 1969 or they are navigating the current backlash against LGBTQ curriculum in the United States. So it's a collaborative, community engaged project that really wants to think about ways in a small setting to counter isolation through dialogue in connections. So we just started our 6th year. Phyllis and Katia, who you'll hear from, were both members of the project and then joined the facilitation team. So they are also facilitators who allow us to think about what an intergenerational research team looks like, and the importance of having different generations represented when joyous and complicated issues arise. And we have that intergenerational team that brings those perspectives and can see things that we might not see from just our own generational perspective. There's lots more that the questions that Nancy has for us will get us into. So I'll stop there.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect, Adam. And again, this is a wonderful project. And there's a great video on your website that I love that actually highlights Katia and Phyllis, which is great. And I know you're doing research now, so research and evaluation. So I think probably at the end of this year or next year, you'll have even more data to show us the impact of the project on both older and younger people. So that's great. And I hope people have gotten a sense of what is happening in these three places in this community. But I want to start, we have a number of questions that we want to discuss. And one of them that I want to start out with is kind of, why do you think it's so important to foster intergenerational exchange and relationships? And any of you can go into that. I don't know if Phyllis or Katia, if you want to jump in here, and then we can go to the others. But why is this so important right now?
I think especially during after and during the this is Phyllis, after the and during the pandemic, separation and isolation has been exacerbated. And kind of what happens is that you're except for your family group, your friend group of associates are your age.
Mm-hmm.
And so and for an older person, the world keeps marching, and I'm still in the 70s. So it's really quite wonderful to have engagement with younger folks to get a better understanding of what's happening, how the language is changing, how concepts are changing, and how things are staying the same all at once.
Yeah, it's true. Katia, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think I guess I'll call it like quality of life. Like for everybody to have community and to have like people to bounce your ideas off of, or to ask questions and be comforted or encouraged. That's to me the reason to be alive, what makes life good, and like we're constantly learning. And so having that community and knowing that and being reminded of it and being cared for is like the most important thing to me. So I think especially in LGBTQ communities where like we don't inherently have intergenerational relationships, because like some people don't have kids, or some people were thrown out of their families, or some people are just like ashamed, or like there's like predatory stigma and like all of that. So like that gets in the way of really, really rich relationships a lot of the time. And so kind of us being intentional, like you love the word intentional, Nancy, but like
I love it.
being intentional about being like, we're coming together to see how we can care for each other. That's why it's so important. And we're constantly learning, and then we're alive.
Great. Thank you, Katia. And Wilfred, when you and I talked about just the cultural context in Puerto Rico and some of the things that are going on there, what makes it so important to start looking at ways to connect generations. You want to share some of that?
Sure. I think the cultural context here is very important, and it influences everything that we do. First of all, I should disclose LGBT phobia of any kind is very much existent here in Puerto Rico, just like many other parts of the world, including United States. And that we always have to have it up front and thinking about it because of our interactions with the multi-generational, so much of that is internalized. And that because of that, the LGBT elder and or the youth or the young adult really have an issue about coming out, identifying as someone in the diverse LGBT community. They may live one part of their intersectionality that they are, because they may not be able to erase that, meaning the race part. That race part cannot be erased if you look Black, or if you're Black, of course. If you are from different tone of skin, you cannot say, well, I'm not Black, because, well, you are. And in Puerto Rico, that also brings a whole lens of racism that is so much living day in and day out. And so when we develop these programs, we begin from that lens, understanding that there's so much diversity in Puerto Rico, and that the culture of any kind, meaning of race or of being LGBT or even being a transgender individual, that is just beginning. There is a culture about that. And so we intentionally think about those isms, classism and all the other isms that are experienced around the world. And we begin the conversations with some of that to really put it up on the board, put it up on the conversation, acknowledging that that is something that everybody in that room has to live everyday life. And an anecdote that I think I mentioned to you, Nancy, and maybe if not, here it goes. Going to a doctor's visit, you know, something that it should be so simple that you're going because you have a medical issue, really becomes a very much a problem for an elder or a young adult that is LGBT and that not identify like that, because they're afraid of not being able to receive that specialized medical service. An anecdote very quickly is a 70-year-old young, I say 70-year-old young man, gay man, that had lived and has lived openly as a gay man, but they enter a new closet in later in years because then they're afraid of not being able to receive that specialized service. And he comes and he sees me, you know, I'm the executive director, so I don't see any more patients. At the beginning of Waves Ahead, I was seeing patients I'm a psychologist by trade. So, you know, I was seeing patients. When he sees me around, you know, now that I don't see any, he says, do you have a moment? And he tells me this story, and it's so sad. He lived many years in the United States, in continental US, and lived openly as a gay man. And now when he comes back to retire to Puerto Rico more than 12 years ago, has to enter this closet. That's something that we consciously have to think about, and that are not only our young adults are coming out of the closet, but after they come out, what are we going to do to assist them maintain that way of living until their last day here on earth? So that's something that intentionally we need to think about. And we at Waves Ahead really have that conversation openly, because they should live whoever they want to be until their last day on earth.
Thank you, Wilfred. Yes, I do remember that story and I was really moved by it. And it is an issue that has to be dealt with. I think, Andrew, rather than, I mean, I don't know if you want to add something to this, but maybe we could move in, because I think it's a nice segue to how do we understand, you know, generational differences. And there are lots of queer theory or different generational frameworks or generational layering. Can you share a little bit about what you found so that as we continue to talk about how to foster these relationships, we understand what words do we use? What framework do we use?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're all very familiar with generational labels like baby boomer and Gen X and millennial and Gen Z. But when we were doing our study, we found that very few of our participants actually use those labels because they were telling stories in relation to their gender identity and sexual orientation. And so their stories were related to LGBTQ events and history, and decisive moments in their lives. And so what we did was we looked for what other researchers have done and what they've said about this idea of queer generations, that the LGBTQIA plus lives have different sort of generational chronologies and experiences. And, you know, there's been some work about things like Stonewall generation and an AIDS generation. And we found that, you know, that although those are quite useful, those very broad categories don't actually reflect the complexity of the layering of people's lives and the intersections that Wilfred's just been talking about. and really, you know, our use of queer theory was in order to challenge and disrupt some of our sort of expectations and sociological concepts that we might use. But really what we found was that it enabled us to get at those aspects of people's lives where somebody may come out in midlife, and in a sense their access to understandings of who they are might have a greater similarity with people who are 20, 30 years younger than them. And so, in a sense, we need to move away from this kind of linear view of generations and think about generations in a more kind of complex and intersectional way. And so that's what we do in that chapter. And really, I think it's us trying, you know, you can read it as us trying to understand some of those complexities and to get away from these sort of very broad generational labels that actually aren't really that helpful for understanding LGBTQIA lives.
Thanks, Andrew. I thought that was really interesting when I read your article, because I do think we tend to fall back on the traditional generational framework, and the generational layering in particular makes a lot of sense. And, you know, as we think about how do we create inclusive spaces and culturally sensitive ways for people to exchange, understanding, you know, where they are in the life course, what the cumulative experiences that they've had when they came out. And it may be that a 20-year-old trans person has more in common with a 50-year-old trans person than they do someone else. So I think it's very, very helpful. I want to move. Does anyone have anything to add to this before we kind of move on?
Yeah, Nancy, I forgot to mention about the colonial part
Oh,
that is
yes.
added to the LGBT community. And I think that colonialism, many people analyze it as just a historical factor or as a political factor. And the LGBT community, and here in Puerto Rico, it's even added the Puerto Rican LGBT community, we're added layers of colonialism that we're supposed to accept X or Y because the colonial or the person that is in power, and there it goes into the oppressor, continues oppressing you to acquire whatever the oppressed needs. People can read the Theory of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, read about it, then you will maybe understand this context that I'm talking about. And Dr. King mentioned about the Stonewall, and then colonialism coming to the Stonewall piece, because we're supposed that because we are in the world living as LGBT people, that's the only thing that acted the LGBT community. No, that is what happened in continental US that now we have adopted and we have learned from, that happened in the 60s, the same day that the star was, died, Judy Garland. But that's a historical fact, that it moved the LGBT community in continental US to do what they do and to fight for what they have. Great. But really, the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia is May 17. And that's what we in Puerto Rico commemorate, because that is the day international. And I'm thinking that Dr. King celebrates more or commemorates maybe the International Day Against Homophobia in June, because now all around the world, June is celebrated as the month of Pride based on the Stonewall community. But really, Pride should be celebrated throughout the year, because there has been so many different historical instances from Africa to Puerto Rico to other parts of the LGBT community to fight for our struggle.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think it really is critical on both the colonialism and the cultural aspect of this. I want to hear a little bit from the intergenerational dialogue team about some of the differences that you see between young people and older people, and also maybe between, it's a very diverse community. It's not like everybody's gay or everyone's, trans. They're all different things. So what are some of the experiences or differences that you see, Phyllis and Katia and then Adam as well, through the dialogues? I mean, there are commonalities and there are differences. So I think it's important to acknowledge both and to honor both. So Phyllis, you want to get started?
Sure. I will say that one of the big differences is that the elders are frequently the first to speak.
And there you are, the first to speak.
There I am, right. But I think one of the things that happens is it really depends on when you came out.
Right.
You know, so for example, right now we have somebody that knew he was transgender when he was a child. And he's one of the elders. Most of the elders really recognized it or admit to recognizing it much later in life. Or they just weren't free to act on it, but this individual acted on it pretty early on in their life. So I think that that's a huge difference. I mean, for me, for example, I know that when I got married, I came out in my 30s. My wife knew much younger, in her teens. She did not invite any of her work colleagues. I invited all of mine because came out in a period socially where she had to separate her life, her work life from her social life. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe we can hear from Katia too about some of the either similarities or differences with an older generation.
Yeah, I think especially in the dialogue project, we have such a diverse range of people in our project. So like each individual, even among the youngers, even among the students, especially among the elders, like everybody is so different from where they come back, like their background, race, culture, class, like everyone is so different from each other. And I think it was really interesting to hear what you said, Andrew, about kind of thinking about generations as like uniting us by our experiences. And I've found that something that makes us all very similar is our differences and is our like a kind of attitude. I find over and over again, like we do certainly have arguments and like tensions about how we're defining terms, how we're defining experiences, what we're assuming somebody else went through. But I think that when we do engage in the space that we're offered a little bit, time and time again, people are like, well, you know what? I know what it's like for someone to tell me that how I'm thinking about something or how I'm processing something is just absolutely incorrect and cannot be. And when, as queer people, we kind of like, we are the way that we are. There's not like there's not an explanation. There's not a way to justify or rationalize this, except that we're allowing ourselves to listen to ourselves, be honest with ourselves, and not judge ourselves. I think that's a practice that I find a lot of the queer elders have been like, I don't understand non-binary, and I'm unsure about what it means to be trans, and it's frustrating, you know, because it's like new information, and you fought hard. Like we had some elders talk about how they fought really hard to use the word homosexual, to use the word lesbian, to say those proudly and with their chest and like fully identify with that, and they fought for those labels. And so to like for people to be like, well, I'm pansexual and non-binary and I'm a non-binary lesbian, and kind of like breaking down these words that they fought really hard for is challenging. But at the end of the day, the core of being like, I want to fight for my ability to love who I want to love and love them well and love them openly, that core, that through line is kind of what we're all doing here. So I find that once we kind of get past the semantics and get past the like not really knowing how to communicate with these new people that we've met, and like once we kind of become friends and we can kind of like work it out and fight it out, we're all kind of doing the same thing. We have the same mission of like being in community with each other and allowing to expand and grow.
Thanks. Yeah, you brought up so many points and really points to the humanness of this. And we're talking about humanity. We're talking about being able to accept yourself and have other people accept themselves. And I think judgmentalness is, I've heard this a lot about different generations, not intentionally being mean, but really not understanding the pronoun stuff, the labeling, the language, and sometimes saying, well, this is what I went through, and I don't understand what you went through, or the young people doing the same thing. So I want to look at some of the challenges to bringing generations together. And Adam, I don't know if you want to share some of the stuff you've seen in in the intergenerational dialogue or wherever, to see some of the challenges that different generations face and how that impacts their ability to relate to each other.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I think, some of the things that Katia and Phyllis already pointed on are some of those challenges that are also opportunities. In the sense that the challenge is that because most of us haven't had the opportunity to engage in dialogue with elders in a sustained way, we have to learn how to do that, which oftentimes requires a certain unlearning of our kind of defensiveness, right? If we've constantly had questions that put us on the defense, when we're in a space where people are asking those questions out of curiosity, we have to kind of be able to recognize that defensiveness that comes up and sit with that. And that defensiveness is not just around questions of gender identity and sexual orientation, right? But the intersections of race, class, education attainment levels, geography, language. And so our project is intentionally kind of over the course of an academic year, because we know that it takes a lot of time for people to become comfortable with sitting with those challenges and like sitting with our own kind of reactions and learning how to unpack those. We have a very large team of people. There's 8 facilitators that come from different backgrounds, and we collaborate with a senior services center, which allows us to address those other material conditions. So, because the young adults in the project are college students, right? There's material resources and supports that the university can offer. But we also wanted to be able to recognize and think through, how do we support elders who may have needs as well around housing, food insecurity. And so our partnership with the center on Addison helps us also navigate those material challenges, which are also oftentimes a touch point for intergenerational dialogue, right? Because it's not just that elders experience housing insecurity. Some of the young people have also experienced housing insecurity. And so like those, again, that kind of challenge becomes this opportunity to talk through and learn from and share resources and how people have survived really challenging things. I think the biggest challenge, because we're a project focused on dialogue, is learning how to dialogue in a mode of curiosity and not a mode of defensiveness or debate. We're not debating people's identities. We're trying to ask curious questions, which I think Katia was getting at, in terms of really helping one another and our own selves understand what are these words that we use that help us feel grounded in the world, and how do those connect to the histories that we now have an opportunity to explore through intergenerational dialogue.
Yeah, that's great. And the program is remarkable. And I hope you're able to share a lot of the research that you find, because I think this is a replicable model, whether it's a year-long program or just with college students. I think the idea of helping people figure out, how do you start talking? How do you create an environment that is accepting and welcoming, not just tolerant, but welcoming. So that moves us into, a discussion about, like, how do we do this work? What do we need to do? I mean, I talked to a number of LGBTQ centers, but again, they're more multi-generational in that the programming is side by side, then intergenerational, focusing on relationships. And in the past, I guess there are a lot of spaces that have been safe for people in the community. It might be a gay bar, it might be a bookstore, it might be a gay neighborhood. But, you know, even in these safe spaces, is there an intentionality about fostering exchange? And so I'm wondering, you know, if you can, a lot of people on the call are working with different generations. And I'm wondering if you can give some tips or some thoughts about, you know, how can we go about intentionally fostering trust and understanding, and maybe joint advocacy, and, you know, what barriers are we facing, but also what, as you said, Adam, the barriers also can become opportunities. So story sharing clearly is one way of doing that. And I don't know if any of you want to go into detail more, but, you know, I'd like you to hear some tips from all of you on what you think could be implemented by some of the people who are on this call. Anybody?
Nancy, you always use a word since I met you about doing it intentionally. You know,
do.
I have never used that word so intentionally for the interventions. You know,
Okay.
because for me and for the staff here of Waves Ahead, you know, is what you just said, is developing that trust that we are, you know, we assume as Waves Ahead, we're the only LGBT provider here across the island of Puerto Rico. That is 5 community centers focused on the whole being of the LGBT individual. Mind you, having said that, there is one for HIV, people living with HIV, other people maybe with diabetes, but not addressing all of you as a whole LGBT. So one of the things that we focus more, and it's intentional, but we don't use the word, is the trust. Trust that we can work together as a community. When we don't see each other as the provider, we see each other as a community member, that we provide a service and that we both are receiving the service. Me as a facilitator and you as a participant. And we, although have, you know, the position that are providing that service, we also are learning from you as the individual. And so that develops trust. Also, getting out of the walls of your center, that develops trust, and that really strengthens your programming. I think, Nancy, when you and I spoke off for planning for today, you know, I talked to you about the community groups that we developed and that we implement of discussions with the lens of restorative justice, with that lens of the oppressed versus the oppressor, with the thinking of the queer theory. And so we give those tools to the participants so that the participants also become the facilitator and really the provider of the service. We do that community, we develop that community. And for us, that is the intentional word, community. That is what we try to develop with the trust and with the skills that we know. For people who want to develop this, of course, you know, funding is needed to develop all of this. Let me just be very honest. And so the political aspect of many of our countries or many of our cities and towns is very hard to get funding focused on this intergenerational work, but you need to advocate. And I think, maybe this is me being a little bit naive, because we have developed that community here in Puerto Rico, they have helped us, we have helped them, and we both help each other in getting this funding in order for the work to continue. Those experiences are so rich. And that it is hard to get the funding? Yes, it is. I'm not going to deny it. That we may have a good day or a bad month? Yes, we do. But the community is what makes us continue the work. And maybe the funding is not there. For one of our centers, we lost funding for this work. But you know what? The community came together and they continue the programming. They use our facilities and they continue the programming without funding. And so that is very rich. That is community.
No, I really appreciate the focus on community. And also I love the idea of, you know, sometimes service, there's such a distinction between the service provider and the service recipient. And I think what you're saying is it really needs to be a collaborative work where everyone in it is benefiting and everyone in it is contributing and helping to move forward. So thank you for that. How about in England, Andrew? I know that there was a lot going on in the UK a while ago. Most of those programs are not going on right now, but what do you see as some possible strategies that can be used in the UK?
Well, I think, we've witnessed this year the UK's largest older LGBTQ charity opening doors, closed down. And I think that was a shock for many of us who had worked with them over many years. And I think it just emphasizes the need to build alliances right across the community, and also sort of, let's think about aging as a whole life process. And intergenerational work as an ongoing process to build those strong communities that we need, particularly at times of political backlash, and culture wars and things like that, which we've seen quite a lot of in the UK recently. I completely agree with Wilfred about the point about trust and safe spaces. And I think also mindful, one person's safe space might not be another's, and very much, thinking about intersections and building trust and alliances for everybody as well.
Yeah, that's really important. In a few minutes, we're going to continue our discussion, but people can leave, and we're going to continue and take some of the questions from the chat room. But I do want to end with, we've been talking a lot about spaces that are kind of exclusive for the LGBTQ community, but I'm wondering also, there are many people who deal with lots and lots of different people. How can they create welcoming spaces so that they are, again, not tolerant, but welcoming and enabling and bringing people of all backgrounds and the whole intersectionality issue together in a space, whether that's a senior center or a recreation center or, something else? Are there any tips you have about really creating this welcome community for all ages in the LGBT community? Anybody can jump in there.
I'll jump in.
Katia?
I think that's something that, regarding community work, is valuing everybody's individual voice. I know as a student, like, I'll speak in my personal experience as a student. I'm a student of the School of the Art Institute, which is how I'm in the project. But like, as a student, I kind of came in being like, I don't know what skills I have to offer, and I don't know what I have to offer here. Like, I'm just a kid from Florida. Like, I'm just trying to see and be loved and love the people around me. And the community that we're with was very affirming, and we kind of like see everybody where they are and acknowledge that we literally all have something incredible to offer. And so valuing the individual's voice and listening, and then also taking feedback. Like we said, we get into all these conversations that are tough and hard sometimes, and you're like, we're not always agreeing, and it's not like a big rainbow party. Like, being LGBTQ, there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of like things that we need that we don't get, like funding and housing and like health and like all of these struggles that we go through. So listening to people and then saying like, oh, we need accommodations. We need people to be able to be comfortably sitting in this space, or we need people to be able to have access to the readings in a physical form so we can print things out for you, or we don't get to meet everybody, so maybe it'd be nice to have like small groups more often. Like, in the dialogue project, every year that they do it, that they facilitate it, we change something or we try something new because something didn't work or someone didn't feel cared for. So we're going to try and like get a little bit closer to caring like the best way that we can. So like listening and kind of acknowledging that it's not going to be perfect right off the bat, but like constantly reassessing your position and reassessing what's working. And it doesn't work for everybody. We haven't had a 100% success rate of everyone falling in love with each other, but like it's part of the process of the work. And so when we do this and we share it with each other, we're learning and listening and growing. I think that's what's kept me there for 3 years, I guess now, 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that.
Thank you so much, Katia. I think that's a nice way to end this particular part. Works to everybody stay on. We're going to continue. But the voice of our youngest member, I think, is very powerful here. So thank you, Katia. Sherry, you just want to do the transition there? I would share with us some
I will do the
questions.
transition. I will close out this part of this session. Our panelists, Nancy, are going to stay on for another 30 minutes. If there are questions, discussion, you want other information you want to get, we will be, again, mentioned we're recording the webinar. We will be sending out the recording to everyone, along with the newsletter that has all the resources that we've talked about in this meeting, plus a whole plethora of additional resources that Nancy's found through her extensive research and conversations that she had. So that should be coming out in a couple days as well. I want to thank our panelists for just a powerful, enlightening presentation, discussion, as well as Nancy for facilitating and pulling this all together. So we are going to maybe just pause for a moment. So for folks that do need to jump off, can jump off, and then we will transition into some more conversation.
Sherry, do we have questions in the chat room? Or should we just encourage people
I sent a message right before I kind of turned my camera on about putting questions in. So I didn't really see any that came up. So folks are welcome. I don't know if let me change some of the meeting. I'm going to change the meeting settings a little bit so that hopefully folks can they should be able to raise hands. Maybe I'll set it so you could also start your video if you have a question. Let's see what's going on the Zoom back end.
So should we continue to talk? We can
Yeah.
continue to talk? Okay, guys.
And
so Katia,
and I just was going to say, and I'll let you know if we should be able to see. We'll go ahead and turn off the spotlights too, so that you can kind of see everyone's boxes. So if hands come up, we should hopefully be able to, if the hands function is working, we should hopefully.
Zoom is wonderful
hopefully
unless it doesn't work.
That's right. Yeah, it looks like it should work. So.
Okay, so if now why am I the
Hold on,
so
we're working our way through them all, through everyone.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, so is there anyone who has a question? And you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Otherwise, we will continue the discussion we have. Let's give a minute if anyone has a question. Brought up a lot of really interesting issues that show the complexity of this effort. Oh, Sherry, why don't you just jump in when you get a question? Okay. So presenters, let's continue our discussion, which I've been enjoying. I think this whole idea of what people can do and what are some of the barriers to figuring out. Oh, wait a minute. I see a question here. You see it? What are the top?
Go ahead, Nancy.
What are the oops, I just lost it.
It's what are the top tips for designing intergenerational spaces to enable relationships to spark and flourish amongst people of different age groups?
Okay, who would like to give their perspective on creating these spaces? On any
well,
whether
I could say some practical tips.
Okay.
First of all, make the space accessible to all, meaning no matter your physical situation, or also be able to do the intervention or group or whatever you might be able to activity to do in the neighborhoods where they are coming from or in the areas that they're coming from. Don't do it in an area that doesn't have public transportation or that people cannot reach it, because then if not, then you'll start saying, well, they're not coming. Well, duh, you know, they're not coming because they cannot reach you. So that's one first practical thing. The second thing is try to, I think Katia mentioned it, that, you know, she as a student really felt comfortable going because they take into consideration, in a sense, I'm assuming, the time and the date that she and others like her could go to. So those are practical things, you know, first of all, accessibility. Second of all, making it a time that people can join both generations or all the generations in the spectrum. And so be able to speak their language. And that's the third one.
Mm-hmm.
Phyllis, what about you?
I also think that
Yeah.
one of the things that Katia said, is just to underline it again, is that whole business of making sure that everybody knows that this is a space where we want to hear from everyone, where everybody's voice is important, and that we're coming from wildly different places sometimes. And so this is an opportunity to explore what's wildly different and what's so similar. And that for the elders, it's not about teaching the youngers. It's the youngers can teach us. And they do, thankfully.
You know, that is such an important issue. And I think one of the things, I'm older too, I'm in my 70s. And I think sometimes we've heard a lot as we grow older that our role is to teach the next generation, to share our experiences, that we've had a lot. And it's all true. I mean, that is true. We've had some things. But I think what happens sometimes is that if older people come in with that intention, there isn't as much encouragement of hearing what are the experiences of young people and what do they have to teach us. And I know storytelling is really important for all different kinds of intergenerational programs, but I love the story sharing name better. And that if you're intentional, Wilfred, intentional about being bi-directional. So that so often I hear that there are great oral history projects, but it's all young people interviewing older people.
Exactly.
And if you don't build in older people interviewing younger people about what they're going through right now, we're missing so much. So you don't get to the point of what do we have in common. But,
Right.
you know, you're saying, well, this is what I went through. And this is, so I think it's just really important to be bi-directional on all of this. And as you say, create opportunities where people hear each other. Okay, we have another question, Sherry.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple more, and as well as many, many compliments to the panel. So I do want to mention that as well. But someone mentioned they, you know, again, thanking everyone for sharing. They're curious to hear about what gets you through those tough days. Is there a moment or story that has stood out to you from your work, motivates you to continue this path? What excites you about the future of intergenerational work?
Great question. So who wants to start?
I'll say
Okay, you're
something.
the
I
elder.
know that
You can start, Phyllis.
I thought that, you know, I had a certain amount of experience as I grew older and more insight as I've grown older. But what shocks me and what keeps me coming back is the amazing maturity and insightfulness of the younger folks.
As reflected in Katia's answers here.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think we had somebody raising their hand. Marty?
Yes, good morning. I have issues with my voice. I hope you can hear me all right. I understand, and I think we have had problems. I had an issue with being really sanctimonious when I started working in the project. I am a 79-year-old cis lesbian, and I'm a feminist, but not a separatist, I say. And I'm delighted to hear the word feminist being used again, both in our community and by straight women as well. But But I'm wondering, I was really, really sanctimonious about youngers not having any knowledge about any of the history, and if they were coming out or had any experience. Today you can just Google and find out all sorts of things. And I was sanctimonious that they had no sense of history about the AIDS epidemic, as we called it then, or little or no knowledge at all, didn't know what that was. Very, very little interest or any understanding about who Harvey Milk may have been, which is another landmark in our history. And so, on the other hand, as we tend to get older, we also become more needy, and we want to know, what have you done for us lately, for those who work with us? So that's two questions, I guess, which is, why do you do what you do? As we get increasingly older, we tend to get into this rut of, you did this for me, you should have been doing it all along, and what are you going to do for me next? So that's two questions. Why do you do what you do?
Great. Who wants to answer and also continue with the original question that Jerry had about, and I think it's similar to that. So who wants to share?
Well, for me, I'm doing what I'm doing, maybe egotistical of me, because I'm getting older and I need a space in my Puerto Rico where I can go and receive the services that I will need when I go older. And so I'm developing what I will be needing. So maybe call me egotistical, but that's what I'm doing. And so I'm developing housing programs because I may need to live in a community that is for LGBT people. I'm developing mental health services and medical services because that's what I may need in the near future. And so that's what I'm trying to develop a community that I would love to live in, because do unto others as you would like to do unto yourself. So that's what I'm trying to develop here in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. How about Adam or Andrew? Why are you doing what you're doing, and what keeps you going?
That's a question I ask myself quite often. I don't see myself as just an academic. I see myself as doing that to try to make changes in the world around me, based on a lot of the research. Of 17 years of LGBT aging research, I've got to the point where I can interview myself now as well. It's along the journey, I had many people say to me, "We want you. We've done our bit. What are you going to do?" And I think there's something in that. I think I'm always, think it's important for everyone to do their bit, but I think there's something in that as well. And I just think, certainly in terms of my work on housing, I think it's in the UK, but I know this is true in many other parts of the world, that the housing situation for older LGBT people is so dire, so bad at times, that really that just cannot go on. And so that's what keeps me going as well.
And Adam or Katia, do you want to add anything here?
I mean, I want to think about the tough days question. I think the thing that helps keep going is that our project is a community engaged project. So when there's a tough day, you have a community to draw on, to think through the issues that have arisen, and to know that those tough days oftentimes lead to really beautiful insights. And our project is intergenerational, but it's also interclass, it's interracial, it's intergeographic. And so all of those issues come into the mix. And so we have to learn how to listen. And part of that is having other people help us hear things that we might not be able to hear from our own positions until somebody has helped us hear that. And so I think that's a tip, like having a really kind of interdisciplinary, intergenerational, interracial, multi-class team is really, really helpful because the community, LGBTQ plus communities are not monolithic, right? They're plural, they're diverse. And so, another tip that helps that we've learned is that when we start the project every year, we do orientations for both
Mhm.
the kind of elder cohorts and the younger cohorts to really help name some of the issues that might arise, both in terms of the like beautiful, magical moments, and then those more complex, complicated moments. And that, we talk about staying in the room with one another because oftentimes people step in, a pile of doo-doo because they don't know. And there's an educational component to this that is helping other people come into that knowledge through the conversation. So orientations and a great team both help do the work and help navigate those tough moments.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think the fact that you do have an intergenerational team, research team, it really reflects your commitment to that concept. And I think that, staying in the room and helping people kind of understand what's going on. And someone told me, I was interviewing somebody who ran a center, and she said, what we need to give people grace. That sometimes people say things and they're not trying to be intentionally, mean, or that they just don't know. And that we should give people the benefit of the doubt and then do what you're saying and do some education about it rather than initially just putting them down and saying they just don't understand us. And I thought the whole idea of giving people grace was very beautiful.
Mhm.
Katia, do you want to add anything? What keeps you going in the tough times?
Yeah, I think that it kind of goes into Marty's point of like, there, our elder generations have done so much like with their everyday that like, I live in this big gay house with my roommates that are like, I live in a three-story building when two of the floors are full of my gay friends and some of them I met at the Dialogue Project. And like, I live in Chicago and I get to be fully free, and I'm really exploring and using all of these resources that were fought for me to have, and am very grateful and I'm very aware of that. But then what keeps me going is kind of being like, and I kind of have a responsibility to my community, who not in like in a reciprocal way where I owe anybody anything, but like the spirit of our community is like serving each other. That's what we've always done. Like Marty was a nurse, like an angel of death, if you will, to like Marty, I'm telling your business, sorry girl. Like to like men dying with AIDS in the 80s, like, and that's like, that is a very big job, and that's something that you have to like, that's your everyday, and that's emotional labor and that's physical labor. And we do that because we care about each other, because like if we don't, nobody will, but like we will step into that role. And so this is, I guess, me being in this project is kind of being like, what are my strengths in this community to serve us and share and prolong that legacy of queer culture being of service to each other. So that kind of keeps me going. And when I don't really know what that answer is, or when I'm struggling, or when I'm doubting myself and feeling like I don't have a space in that, having my community there to kind of be like, no, these are your strengths, Katia. this is why we love you. And then being like, and you could do better this way also, like, or this is what I've done in the past and it's not that hard to do, get your head out of your ass. Like we have that like get it together mentality, and that helps me get it together and keep going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's wonderful you have the community that you do. Any other thoughts on what gets you through? And are there any other, if not, are there other questions, Sherry?
We do have some other questions, but I'll pause and let if there's any other thoughts.
Okay.
I think Adam, you mentioned this slightly. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Marty.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wanted to respond to what Adam said because I think he was talking to me directly when he spoke of stepping in the doo-doo. Because we know, I'm a former member of the project, and proudly so, I might add, and everyone there, particularly Adam, knows that I am not without opinion, oftentimes without thinking it through. And I'll open my foot and my mouth and stick my foot in it, or step into the doo-doo, as he said. And then I have to go back and admit to being wrong when I am, and which is fairly frequently, and go around finding out that I have to apologize. And that's not that anyone makes me do this, but not just to the person, one maybe that I offended, but I've got to get all the people who were present, means probably another meeting, and apologizing in front of everyone, which is just eating some real crow. So I'm one of those people without opinion, and I always have an opinion, and I'm perfectly willing to bark it off far too often.
Well,
I think,
thank
Marty,
you,
you
Marty.
kind of answered part of the question. We had a question about conflict and conflict resolution, and what if that disagreement actually is there's some hostility behind it, or some, there's often passion. And I was thinking Adam's comment both about, preparing people and orientations and setting expectations in these spaces is really important. Are there other tips or thoughts that people have about, dealing with conflict and then potentially hostility, if it comes up?
I think that one of the things the Dialogue Project does is encourage reflection. So from the participants and the facilitators, we're always kind of reflecting on, well, what happened? What was said? What was done? How can we be different? What do we really hear? All of those things.
And that's a promising practice, or just a best practice, no matter what kind of work you do, to build in having people look at themselves and look at what happened and figure out, what worked, what didn't work, what am I learning about myself, what surprised me. So I'm glad you brought up the reflection piece.
There were two other questions that are, I think, somewhat aligned about adapting the work. Someone asked about insights into virtual intergenerational spaces, and has anyone done, I know during the pandemic, we all were doing, we're in a virtual space right now. We all were doing a lot of virtual work. Is there anything that folks had about that? And then just to piggyback on that, in case it overlaps, any work in long-term care settings with older adults with dementia. So those are just some other thoughts that some questions that came up.
Well, about the virtual working with intergenerational spaces is that the pandemic at least taught us at Waves Ahead the need for not assuming that because of age, you may or may not know how to use all the different platforms, because there were young adults who didn't know how to use the specific platforms, as well as older adults. And so that provided us a means to have these conversations, to really hold these trainings, multi-generational, intergenerational, and to teach each other. The other thing that happened during the pandemic is that we learned that technology was not available to many of our participants. And so we needed to recruit free technology that we could have a quick turnaround and give for free to individuals, including laptops, including smartphones, including headsets, including all of these things that we were not planning for it. At least Waves Ahead was not planning, or even anywhere around the world we were planning for that. So that was a quick learning curve for everybody. And now that we have been at this for almost, it's going to be more than 4 years now, it continues to be a way for individuals that are outside of the metro area or cannot reach the space for X or Y reason on that specific date, that they don't lose that educational session, that they don't lose that mental health session. So really has provided us a way to continue the conversation and to continue the intervention. In regards to the services with seniors with dementia, we have just begun that work. Is going to be interesting. I don't have too much to say, except that before we began it, we did collaborations with associations that focused on dementia. And because we focus on LGBT and elders, we were able to collaborate with them to enter these spaces. And they're helping us adapt our interventions in the community in these facilities. So we just started, it has been maybe 2 months tops, so I don't have too much to share, except that it really, you cannot do it alone. You really have to really bring someone who really has that expertise. And although we're taught about it in social work or psychology, you know, it's not the same thing. And it's not the same thing to do and adapt this work. Yeah, you can learn about it in books. Yes, you hear about it. You see so much in videos of YouTube, but really, I really say invest on working collaborative efforts with associations focused on Alzheimer's and really be able to integrate yourselves into long-term care facilities with people with dementia. It is not impossible, it is possible, and really is so rich in what's happening in those interventions for the last 2 months. But I don't have too much more details to share.
That's okay, Wilfred, and we'll look forward to hearing more. But I just think long-term care settings in general, there may need to be more staff training. You know, so you don't want people to have to go back into the closet. So, you know, many of these places, they're young staff members who work. So really doing training, and as you said, Adam, training and orientation is so important in everything. So I think in assisted living, in senior housing, just understanding, you know, what people need and how they want to contribute. The other thing is in the newsletter, we have a little blurb on, it's called Pride, Pairs with Pride, and it's part of Perfect Pairs, and it's out of Michigan, and they are virtually connecting younger people in the LGBT community with older people. So you might want to read about that and get in touch with them. And we have 2 minutes. Anything else that came up, Sherry?
I'm sorry if I missed. Oh, we just said, I guess maybe we can close on this question and comment. Someone asked, what have been the most surprising similarities between the generations in the work?
I think one of the most disappointing challenges is the challenge of stigma in a variety of different ways that interferes sometimes with communication or validation of one's experience.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Gotcha.
I'll say
and then
we
Andrew.
are also like gay people like to have fun. Like we're silly, and like the humor and the cheekiness and the ability to kind of get real while being fun, like while kind of using some humor. That kind of surprised me because I was like, oh, okay, well, we're all different, so we're gonna have a different sense of humor. But like, yeah, that was my biggest surprise, I think.
And having fun is really important as a way to connect.
Yes.
You know, you don't just connect in heavy duty dialogue. You can also connect having fun together. And we haven't really talked about the arts, but using the arts to connect people and to express themselves and do things together is really powerful.
And I think Andrew, you had turned on your mic. So
yeah, so I was going to agree with Phyllis and Katia. Actually, I think, you know, unsurprising discrimination just keeps on rolling in, but fun and joy and the theatre project that I was talking about, that has been a real something really different that I've done, and it's been really great to see those kind of creative ways of bringing people together as well.
I think that's a good way to end, Sherry. I think we both thank you so much. The panel has just been terrific. I'm just going to clap for you because I think you're all very reflective and thoughtful and had, you know, very lovely insights. And I'm hoping that people who are on this call will think about how they can actually tweak what they're doing. Sometimes it's funding, but sometimes it's, you know, having that, what's the word? The I word, intentionality about, you know, fostering this exchange that you can do as part of your work. But thank you all so much. And Sherry?
Yes, that is it. And a great newsletter full of resources will be coming out to everyone who was part of this webinar. Thank you all again to our presenters. Thanks to everyone else who joined us. If there's other questions, you can email us, connect with us. And with that, we'll close it out.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye,
Thank you
everybody.
all. Be
Thanks,
safe.
everyone.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.